Sacred Symbols, a PlayStation podcast, is brought to you by, well, you. If you want to learn how to support our show, go to patreon.com/laststandmedia. Greetings and salutations. Welcome back to Sacred Symbols Plus, a PlayStation podcast supplement. My name is Colin Moriarty. Today I'm joined by a very special guest, someone who I thought was already on the show, but apparently that's not true. Ian Shearer from 616 Entertainment is here. Ian, thank you for joining me, my friend. How are you today?
Dude, I'm very good. Thank you very much for having me. As somebody who's been a fan, follower, and supporter of yours for probably close to 15 years, very cool to be here. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Yeah, I got confused. I did your show.
Yeah.
I thought, I was like, did he do Fireside Chats maybe? And I was like, I don't know. I feel like I know this person. And then, no, but it was that. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So, well, welcome to the show, Ian. And thank you all out there for being with us here today on Sacred Symbols Plus, which is, of course, our twice weekly supplement to Sacred Symbols, where I talk to random people, cover random topics, jump into random games, all the other fun things. And today is a random topic indeed, but one pitched by Ian that I thought was quite apt because it's something we don't talk about on the show. I've been trying to get around to talking a little bit about games that we don't do justice on the show. Gran Turismo 7 was a big target of ours. We did 2 shows about that with an expert on the show and some others. And today it's wrestling games. What's funny is that I don't have a lot of experience with modern wrestling games, but I certainly played wrestling games as a kid. And I was into wrestling when I was a little kid. I loved the kitschy, campy fucking wrestling era. I love it. And if they ever brought that back, like literally that style over the top, I almost kind of compare it to in some way to like low key drag shows in some way. It's like it was kind of nuts, and I loved that shit when I was a kid. But as I got older, it was just dudes without shirts, and that's boring to me. And so I got out of it, and I realized that my knowledge of all that goes on in this very popular genre is very limited indeed. So, Ian, you're very welcome on the show. I thought it was a great idea for a topic. So, welcome. Introduce everyone to you and who you are.
As you mentioned at the top, my name is Ian Shearer. I run youtube.com/616 Entertainment. I do a couple, 2 to be exact, weekly wrestling game shows, which more often than not are like me playing through a full season mode or a career mode or what have you. But every once in a while, I do something different where just recently I looked back at an issue of the official US PlayStation magazine from 22 years ago. And I wanted to compare the thoughts and reviews of all the games that had come out for the PlayStation, the wrestling games for the PlayStation, up to that point, and look at them with wrestling fans of today and be like, do these thoughts and impressions hold up? Or is there like a huge divot here? And most people found that I won't say the writer's name because I don't want to call him out, but most people were like, what the fuck was this guy talking about?
Revisionism's good sometimes. I totally think it's necessary to do that.
It is. And when you're talking about the past, I knew you were going to bring up how you used to be a wrestling fan and how you used to like the old campy stuff. And I just want to let you know that there are still dudes without shirts on. And there is still some campy stuff going on too. So if you can handle a mixture, I just want to let you know that there's this guy named Malachi Black who can apparently just create this black mist in his mouth. And he recently spit it into the eyes of Sting, who is 63 years old.
I was going to say Sting. Jesus Christ.
He's still going. Malachi Black spit this mist in Sting's eyes, and over the course of like a month and a half, this black venomous circle got bigger around Sting's eye. But Sting then figured out how to steal the powers and spit the black mist into Malachi's eyes. So you're missing some of the good shit.
That's good stuff. I love that. It's so ridiculous. Like I've never, we've discussed it on the show a little bit in random ways, but wrestling to me is so weird that you can't,
super weird.
You can't help but deny. I don't know what it is about it. Like why people take it seriously. When we were kids, how old are you, by the way?
I'll be 32 in December.
Okay. So I'm a little older than you, but at least when I was a kid, earnestly, people really were like, is this real? Is it not? Like, it wasn't quite as accepted. Sometime in the mid 90s, late 90s, everyone was like, fuck wrestling. It's, a lot of people loved it, but everyone's like, it's fake. And everyone at least acknowledged that part of it. But when I was a kid, everyone's like, what is going on here?
There was an on-screen catalyst for how that change kind of happened, where in the mid 90s, going into the late 90s, WCW started to kick the WWF's ass in the ratings. Like, they were taking over with Sting and the NWO. And at one point, Vince McMahon opened up an episode of Raw and told the audience, like, hey, his exact words were like, we're going to stop insulting your intelligence and we're going to change how our storylines are conveyed. So if the audience wasn't clued in at that point, they definitely were that night.
Interesting.
And everything changed in wrestling.
Interesting. Yeah, because I don't know. There was just a real mystery about it. And looking back, I think about my parents watching me watch it. And we're probably, what the fuck is going on here? Is a $1 Million Man and Rick Rude and all these dudes. And I like loved this shit when I was a kid. I even found, it's so funny. I was going through old stuff from my elementary school, and I found stuff from first grade. So 1990, 1991. And I had like Hulk Hogan, like Hulkamania shit all over that. I was like, what? Like it's such a long distant memory. But my original, in going into games, my original wrestling video game memory is actually pro wrestling on NES. Mm-hmm. Starman was my dude. I loved that guy. And
Starman was amazing, and what a great name that is.
And what was the other one? It was like King Karn Corn or some weird. Like, that game was so weird. So talk to me a little bit about your history with wrestling games and where you kind of begin. You're a little younger than me, but it doesn't mean you can't have access to those older things. And obviously things really kicked up on the SNES and SNES, or SNES and Genesis, and then into PlayStation, of course, and N64. But where did you begin?
To your point with things kicking up on the SNES and Genesis, it was WWF Royal Rumble on the Genesis was the first wrestling game that I ever experienced.
Doink's in that one, right?
He's in WWF Raw, which was the next one. That was the sequel. That was like a year later.
I love Doink.
Super close.
Doink's like my favorite.
Doink was the man. Did you know he was played by like 3 different dudes?
Yeah, I read that, which makes it even funnier to me. But
it was Royal Rumble on the Genesis. I played it at my buddy. We call him Bathroom Money Tim Ewers. We played it at his house, and I just remember getting these horrific blisters on my thumb because it's such a button masher to like throw guys over the top rope, and that was one of my first introductions to wrestling. Like going into that game, I knew 2 things. I knew who Hulk Hogan was. And I knew that wrestling was fake. So there was never a cloud for me of like, oh, it's real. And then it was like, I hope no kids are listening, but like finding out about Santa Claus. That never happened for me. Before I ever watched wrestling, somehow it was in my head that it was fake. And something about seeing Bret Hart on WWF Royal Rumble on the Genesis, I was like, this is the coolest fucking thing I've ever seen. Putting guys in sharpshooters, it was the best. And from there, it only got better and better. Super Nintendo onto the PlayStation. WCW versus the World was the first PlayStation game I ever got, and that changed everything all over again. So,
what was the feeling, or what is the feeling, I guess, today about SNES versus Genesis and PS1 versus N64? Because I remember when I was a kid, isn't an N64 game considered the greatest wrestling game of all time? Am I crazy?
No, you're totally on point.
And what about? And I know that with EA, Genesis, and SNES, there's a lot of contention with sports games there, and so I'm just wondering, like, which consoles are considered the places to go and really play, or
it all kind of weaves together, like you said. Like on the N64, WWF No Mercy is kind of considered to be the best of all time. The other one that's like maybe 1B or number 2 would be WWE SmackDown Here Comes the Pain on the PS2, and those games have been what every new wrestling game has been trying to recreate for like 15 years. And you bring up EA and like the SNES versus Genesis war that was going on. For the longest time, THQ and Aki were making WCW's games in the 90s. And then there was a switch over where WCW signed a deal with EA and the THQ Aki pairing went with the WWF. And the WWF's games just picked up huge from there, and EA's WCW games did not, to put it simply.
Yeah, I mean, that was just the wrong choice of license, right? Because the WWF ended up absorbing the WCW, right? I feel like I remember that in some way.
Yeah, in 2001, WCW was going down hard. They had been going down hard for a couple of years, and then they got bought in 2001 by the WWF.
I was just listening to something about this. I don't know what, like totally randomly. I don't know why. It's like fresh in my mind right now.
You know what? I can probably tell you what it was. You're a fan of that YouTube channel, The Company Man, aren't you?
Oh, that's what it was. That's exactly what it was.
Did a video
That's exactly what it was. Yes, thank you. Okay, very well done. Because I was playing Cyberpunk and just going through YouTube videos while I was listening to them, and that is exactly it. Very well done. Okay. So, yeah, because with SNES and Genesis, I ask only because I think the general consensus in the sports and fighting game communities is that SNES had the better fighting games, even though there was cross-platform sports games, especially EA games, are better on Genesis, and were originally only available on Genesis in the very beginning. And then with N64 and PS1, yeah, I was just interested in that because I was really not into PS1 sports games. That jump to polygonal 3D, I was just like, oh man, it was very rough. I remember it wasn't until like NHL, I think NHL 98 was probably the first one I actually bought on PS1. I would actually buy the old ones on SNES.
Yeah.
No, I think 96 was the first one on NHL 96 or Madden 96. Those were available on SNES and PS1 in it. So I had a hard time jumping over. I think that's probably what shook me loose to the wrestling tree as well, because I just couldn't play in that space. I didn't like it. You had brought up Aki though, and I was going to ask you about some of these devs from back in the day. Mm-hmm. Who were considered some of the premier developers of these games? I know that it's different now, and I know there was a lot of drama a few years ago with Visual Concepts kind of coming in and taking over, WWE. So talk to me a little bit about some of these old school developers, like who is considered the cream of the crop in terms of the development space.
The cream of the crop would be Aki, especially when they were teamed up with THQ. And I mean, we mentioned the WWF No Mercy game. Before that, they made WWF WrestleMania 2000. And that is, if you're ranking the games from that era, that kind of comes right underneath No Mercy because they're so similar. But right before those two, Aki and THQ were still working on WCW games. And WCW vs. NWO World Tour on the N64 and WCW NWO Revenge on the N64 are basically the same thing as No Mercy and WrestleMania 2000. So if you grew up a WCW kid like I did, we kind of prefer WCW NWO Revenge to No Mercy just because that's got our guys on it. But outside of Aki being like the premier developer, the next one I would say in line was Yuke's, who worked on the PS1 all the way up to like the PS4 WWE games. They started with WWF SmackDown, and they were on all the way up until WWE 2K19. A lot of people think that when the SmackDown versus Raw series ended and it became WWE like 2K14 or WWE 12 even, a lot of people who are not super tuned in think, and they'll say in my YouTube comments all the time, like, oh, these games were better when Yuke's made them, all the way up to SmackDown vs. Raw 2011. And like, little do they know, Yuke's was making them all the way up to 2K19. So
what happened? I'm sorry, go ahead. I was going to ask you what happened with them, because I was fascinated by what happened. I don't understand how you have this like well-oiled machine. I would assume it's because 2K owns Visual Concepts. I mean, I would assume that that's the only reason, is you just want to cut that money loose. But AEW then just jumped in, right, and secured them, which was the obvious thing to do. So what happened there? I mean, is there any public knowledge of what this, after all this time? It just seems insane to me. I remember that and being like, there's got to be a story behind this.
I think it's insane, and you did assume correctly. So yeah, Yuke's is on the PS1 all the way up to 2K19, and then 2K basically, starting with 2K15 actually, 2K comes to Yuke's, who had so much history making these games, and they basically 2K'd it up. They were like, hey, you know how we have My Career and the NBA games? Let's do that in WWE. And Yuke's apparently were dragging their feet, and they were like, I don't know, we kind of like have a good thing going here. As the years went on, 2K more and more was like, let's do My Career, let's do My Rise, let's do all of this NBA bullshit. And eventually Yuke's and 2K were both at the same time were like, fuck you. And they broke up. And Yuke's actually left, and they started quietly working on their own game. It was not always the AEW game. Apparently, the very baby steps of that had started, and then they linked up. And they were like, well, fuck, this worked out perfectly. So, it was 2K basically interfering and saying, hey, let Visual Concepts come in and start doing this My Career stuff. That's what fucked it all up.
And so Yuke's left in 2K19, right? And then 2K20 was Visual Concepts, and then they skipped the whole next year, right? Because so what was that all about as well? Did I assume that Take-Two owns all of the assets, everything that Yuke's made? So I assume they absorbed all of that, and then it was another team coming in, a very talented team, by the way, that makes arguably the greatest sports game in NBA 2K, kind of coming in and fucking this up. Was that expected at that time?
I mean, I feel like maybe Yuke's expected it, or maybe if we're looking at it with hindsight, maybe they just really didn't want to do it. So maybe they rebelled a little bit behind the scenes, because you would imagine two teams with that much talent and that much history would be able to coincide and put something together. So maybe Yuke's just wanted to do their own thing for a while. But Yeah, Visual Concepts, they came in and they started adding all the My Rise and My Career, and it was, you're right, 2K20 was the one that came out, which was just Visual Concepts and not the pairing of Ukes and Visual Concepts. So 2K20 comes out and it's fucking horrible. It's unplayably bad. It reviewed terribly. They hid it for so long. There was like no gameplay shown until right around the time the game came out. So it's this horrific mess. And then it's like all the WWE fans are like, okay, well, 2K21's got to be better. You know, growing pains, they'll figure it out. There is no 2K21. 2K20 was so bad and it needed so much work to fix that 2K21 was scrapped entirely. 2K22 will come out the next year. No, they delayed that out of like its October window, and it didn't come out until like WrestleMania season the next year, which is like April. So not only did they cancel a full game, but they shifted the release schedule almost half a year.
I was going to say that's got to be a permanent move now, unless they go back and want to do another 18-month wait, which I'm sure their bookkeepers are not going to be pleased about, having had skipped an entire game to begin with. I want to ask you an aside question before I get back into the games. Is my instinct that WWE is declining accurate, or is that I know that all Vince McMahon and all that stuff aside, my perception of modern wrestling is there is competition again. And I know that there always was in Japan and other places, but AEW to me seems to be the most formidable competition that they've had since WCW. Am I off base on that? And how, like, what's kind of the trajectory of this? Because it just seems like everyone's upset all the time. Like no one has any love for this shit anymore. But maybe I'm just seeing the negativity, which is very common in all things.
I will tell you that you're seeing people upset all the time because wrestling fans are one of the worst fan bases that exists in the entire world. And anybody who is a realistic wrestling fan who's listening to this will agree with that. And if they don't agree with that, they're just not self-aware at all. So I can give you my opinion, and
they're like Dark Souls
reality.
fans.
Sure. I can give you my opinion, and I can give you reality, which is I stopped watching WWE years ago because I thought it was fucking terrible. Like, I would say the worst it has ever been. Like, even if you go back to like the mid 90s, which what they call the occupational era, where all the characters were like, oh, he's a garbage man. Oh, he's a hockey goon.
Right.
Like, even the WWE today will look back at that and they'll shit on that era, where to me, the past couple of years have been the worst. Now, when you say, so yeah, in my opinion, it's been declining in quality. But when you say like the Vince McMahon stuff aside, that actually kind of changes the ball game if you don't take that out, because now Triple H is the guy who in real life is in charge behind the scenes of all the creative decisions and all the storylines and who's going to get pushed and who's not. And WWE fans seem to really be enjoying the new direction, even though it's only been like a month at the time that we're recording this. So that's my perspective, other fans' perspective. But then just like the dollars and cents, they're making more money than they ever have because their stock prices continue to rise.
Oh, yeah, they're a publicly traded company, aren't they? That's interesting.
Yeah, publicly traded company. And now they do these things where everything in WWE has to have like its own term because Vince McMahon was fucking nuts. So you can't say hospital. You have to say local medical facility. It's insane. You cannot call a championship belt a belt. It has to be a championship title. It's out of control.
Interesting.
But they no longer have pay-per-views because if you're subscribed to Peacock / the WWE Network, they call them premium live events. And 4 of them a year take place in Saudi Arabia. And those rake in so much money that if you look at a couple of years ago before they were doing those and like their year over year like revenue compared to the past couple of years now that they go over there, it's through the roof. So they're making more money than they ever have. And their ad sales are higher than they've ever been. So quality wise, probably dipping, but business wise, I don't think they could be happier. And that's why Vince McMahon was never changing things on screen. Because to him, it's like, we're making more money than we ever have. You don't like it? Fuck you.
Yeah, someone obviously does. And it is interesting to think that over time, just like with all things, they've managed to tap into the ever-expanding constellation of monetizable routes, you know? Because when I think about my era of WW or WCW and WWF, it's like, especially WWF, I guess, I think of just TV shows. I guess you can go see it, which I never did. And then there's like some licensing and pay-per-view. But now they have all of these. They have their own channel and their own streaming channel and stuff, they were pretty early to that too. So I give them credit for that. And I remember when it came out, I was still living in San Francisco. I was like kind of funny at the time, I think. And I kind of got into like watching all the old WrestleManias and all the documentaries and stuff. So it was pretty cool. So they are tapped into monetizing themselves, and being a publicly traded company, which is uncommon for a sports league, is probably a big deal too in keeping things moving forward. But I want to ask you, Ian, what are people looking for in wrestling games today? I asked this, and it's a pretty general question that I think can be answered in a lot of different ways. Because when you ask a football fan, what do they want in Madden? There's always going to be a certain number of answers and a certain limit to what the game is going to be able to do. I'm just wondering if wrestling fans, to your point, with Take-Two kind of wanting to do like create a wrestler and all of this, is it the licensing stuff that's more important, a la Madden and NHL, or is it more the gameplay and the options that are important, a la iRacing and all of these different kind of boutique games that are coming out on PC and all these different verticals? What is it that people are looking for?
I mean, I think there's a number of different things, and for the last several years, there was a big window where the only wrestling games on the market seemed like the WWE games. So you better be into like the more realistic borderline simulation style that they adapted, or else there's nothing for you unless you kept your PS2 or your N64, which I and many other people did because those are the games we like to play. But in the past couple of years, there have been other games that have popped up. Like there was Retromania Wrestling, which was made by Retrosoft Studios, and the idea for that was it was the, in air quotes, unofficial sequel to WWF WrestleFest, which was an arcade game. So Retromania Wrestling was like a 16-bit arcade-style wrestling game that I actually made the trophy list for.
Yeah, I feel like I remember seeing that because I follow you on Twitter, and I which is so fun. I mean, I'm so happy for you that you're able to do that, because that's really fun to do, and I'm happy. So, and that game looks awesome, by the way.
It's very fun, and you were actually a big inspiration for me approaching Mike over from Retrosoft and saying like, hey man, trophies matter to people. Like I can tell you from experience, I care about trophies, and if there's a game that has a really fun trophy list, trophy hunters who are not necessarily wrestling fans might buy your game because they hear that the game is good and they hear that it's an attainable platinum. And I went out of my way. It's not a bullshit platinum. It's going to take you a couple hours. You're going to have to do everything there is to do in the game. Not overly hard, but not bullshit. So I'm proud of that trophy list. And I
it's
thought
fun.
You might be too.
Yeah, it's attainable. We did the same thing with our first few games. And then, as you probably know, with Perils, since we released it across platforms, we actually made a really easy list and a really hard list, which I thought was really fun. We're not going to be able to do that for much longer, I don't think, because we'll probably not release on PS4 forever. But I wanted to ask you about some of these random games, because we've talked about Ukes and we've talked about Visual Concepts and we talked about WWE and all this, but all of these different names come and go in wrestling, and I was curious if you care about any of them. So I'm just going to ask you about a few. And we were talking about Aki, which I think made this game, but I could be wrong. Rumble Roses. Is there a any love for that game anymore?
There is, and I can tell you there is because I just did an episode of one of my shows, 616 Thunder, over on youtube.com/616entertainment. I played a little bit of Rumble Roses, and all of the comments were a mixture of either I have to play this game when my wife's not home, or I used to play this game as a kid when my parents weren't home. Because for anybody who doesn't know, Rumble Roses was basically mixing pro wrestling with the hottest women you've ever seen in your life. It was the era of jiggle physics, and they took it very seriously. There is a mud pool match, which has never been featured in another wrestling game. But yeah, Rumble Roses, I think, is looked back on fondly by the people who enjoyed it, and that's one of the ones that stands out. You know what? To your point, you asked earlier about what people want out of wrestling games. I should say to your question, not to your point. And I kind of went off on a tangent, but I'll say real quick that what I want out of a wrestling game is for it to be fun again, and for it to not really be super strict and restrictive. And what I mean by that is, like, if you turn on either No Mercy on the N64 or SmackDown Here Comes the Pain on the PS2, it doesn't matter who you're playing as. You could be Rey Mysterio or the Big Show. You can set up a ladder, climb up it, and jump off the top of the ladder. Where in the new games with the simulation style from WWE, if you want to jump off a ladder, your character has to have like a certain ability applied to them. Otherwise, you can't stand at the top of the ladder. And if you can't stand on the ladder, you can't jump off of it. Back in the day, if you wanted to break out of the Hell in a Cell cage, you just ran at it a bunch of times and the wall would like explode. But now you have to like have that special ability applied to you, or else you're not strong enough to get out of the cage. And it's like, just let us do what we want. We just want to play the game. So
and do people want to make their own wrestlers, or do they prefer? So they do. So there is so Yuke's resistance was maybe ill fated, which is to your point. Maybe they wanted out, but was probably not the right move considering people like both the licensed stuff and the unique thing. Or I guess people want to inject themselves into the storyline or whatever of the.
It's not that Yuke's was against creating wrestlers, because that feature's been there forever. What Yuke's was against was the focus on the mode.
I see.
Of like, create your guy and then you start in like the developmental league and then you work your way all the way up to the top. They didn't want to like go through all that because they've always had like season modes and career modes where if you wanted to play as Stone Cold Steve Austin, you could. But the injection of no, they have to create him and you have to like earn these abilities and there will be microtransactions. I think they were like, this is getting a little out of our wheelhouse. Creating wrestlers has always been huge, and it's bigger now than it's ever been, because back in the PS1 days, you had to go online and download these formulas. So like if you wanted to make Sting, you had to download this whole list of like, give him tank top 12 and adjust the colors to like 31.
That's
21.
So interesting that people did that. Yeah.
Yeah. And nowadays they have community creation. So some super talented person can make a Sting that looks exactly like the guy, and then untalented people like me can just click download and we've got them.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love that idea of giving people different slider values, and they're probably competing versions of these guys, and that's cool. I love that stuff, like the Gex Drive era and all of that. Or not Gex, Dex Drive. No, was it Gex? Dex Drive, I think it was. That when people would upload all of their saves and everything to GameFAQs, and you can download all that stuff, and it was very revolutionary. It reminds me a little bit on SNES and even on PS1 of me bouncing back and forth between the newspaper every day and releasing and signing players to my NHL teams and NHL 95 or whatever, so the teams were accurate, since we couldn't connect to the internet and get roster updates. So you were stuck with this roster or whatever it was. I always loved that. How about like the management side of it and the more simulation side of it? Is there any interest in that kind of stuff? That's big in other sports, but I don't know if there's even a place for that in wrestling, to be a manager of a wrestler or the proprietor of a league or something like that. Is there any kind of approach with that stuff?
There is, and the first WWE game that had it was called General Manager Mode. It was SmackDown versus Raw 2006. That was on the PS2. And with the General Manager Mode, you could draft your own roster. Everybody had like different contract amounts, so like you couldn't afford all the top guys. You had to have a mixture of top guys and like mid-carders and jabronis to like have your card fully stacked. And that was really fun. And then for some inexplicable reason, as the games went on, they just took it out and it was gone for the longest time. WWE 2K22 was the first game to bring it back, and it sucks. It's so limited. Like in the WWE, like there's 2 world championships, there's like 2 secondary belts, there's altogether 10, 12 different belts that you can win. In this general manager mode that they brought back, it's just the world title and like the women's title. It's so limited. I don't even know why they bothered. It seems like they just wanted to say, hey, we're back and you've been asking for this, and they threw out this half-baked bullshit.
Yeah, there must be some sort of telemetry that suggests what works and what doesn't, and they can point to it. And you would think you would want to be as broad as possible. Although there might be another argument to just split things up. Have your management game and your, which I don't mind, your multiplayer game and your campaign. I don't know.
I think you're totally right. And there's a general manager mode style game that's made by someone else entirely. I think me and one of my friends are the only people I've ever heard mention this game, but it's called Total Extreme Wrestling by a small developer called Grey Dog Software. It's PC exclusive. I'm a Mac guy, so I can't even play it anymore.
Oh, interesting.
But it was... And obviously, he doesn't have any licenses, so it's all generic guys. But it was super easy to just download like a real roster and like have everything realistic all set up. But that was as in depth as it gets, because there is a weird thing with wrestling games to where wrestling fans know that when when Roman Reigns and Drew McIntyre go out there, they know, hey, we've got 20 minutes and this is going to be the finish. It would be nice as a wrestling fan to have a game where I can decide that. Like, either I book an AI versus AI match and I get to watch it and they're going to follow the parameters that I set out, or there will be a goal on screen to do something like that. But this Grey Dog software game, Total Extreme Wrestling, was all text-based, and that allowed you to set everything to the nth degree. And then you would get graded, like how many people came to your show, what television rating did you draw, like is your company going to go bankrupt because you're not a good booker? I would love if they separated the games in two different IP, I guess, because that would be ideal. That way you wouldn't have to worry about balancing it. But they probably think they would lose their ass. You know, they can't even manage to get one game out a year anymore. So
yeah,
asking for two might be a bit much.
Sure. I was going to ask you about Retromania. You brought that up. I did want to ask you about Fire Pro.
Sure.
This was a really mysterious game to me growing up. Everything that was only in Japan, especially during the 90s, was, who the hell were these guys? Human Entertainment. I think I encountered them with that game Clock Tower, but I didn't really play very many of their games. They don't exist anymore. And then I think Fire Pro went to Spike. But what's the nature of? I know that they released one a couple of years ago, if I remember correctly. But what's the take on Fire Pro Wrestling? This series always seemed to have some sort of hardcore slant, but I actually don't really know anything about it.
Fire Pro is the hardcore wrestling game, so you're totally right about that. Fire Pro Wrestling World was the one that they put out most recently, and it was on PS4. It was on PC. I don't think it ever came to Switch, which is something a lot of Nintendo fans are upset about. And there's no reason it can't run on Switch because it's still all sprite-based, which is awesome. I love that they're still doing that. Like, the environments are like 2.5D, like the ring and the entrance ramp, but all the wrestlers are sprite-based, which is great.
It's beautiful. Yeah, I love that kind of stuff.
Yeah, Fire Pro is the hardcore game because, I mean, I think a lot of the casual audience looks at this 2D wrestling game and they just go like, what is this old shit? And they don't take the time to figure out that, like, this is the deepest gameplay. And you can set the AI to be so smart that the AI, like, if you do a simulation of just like Sting versus Bret Hart, they're going to be trying to knock each other down to put on their finisher, whether it's the Scorpion Deathlock or the Sharpshooter. They're not just going to hit like a hip toss and go for a pin. Like, the AI in those games is smart enough to go for exactly what their strategy would be in real life. And I'm just going to throw out that I have the platinum in Fire Pro Wrestling World, which is a 0.1% rarity.
Wow.
It's one of the hardest platinums that I have. I'm super proud of it. But yeah, Fire Pro is the hard.
I don't have anything that nearly that rare. So congratulations to you. I think my rarest platinum is that random G.I. Joe game that came out a few years ago. And I think it's just because no one played it.
Hey, Fire Pro didn't sell that well, so I'm probably in good company there.
And you were saying some names. So Fire Pro uses licensed characters now?
The Fire Pro Wrestling World game had the license from New Japan Pro Wrestling. So guys, at the time that game came out, it had guys like Kenny Omega, eventually like Jay White was there, Okada, Tanahashi. Those guys are in the game. But Fire Pro from the PS2 days, as you were mentioning earlier, Fire Pro Wrestling Returns or Fire Pro Returns on the PS2, that was the first game that I ever modded a console for. I installed a flip top in my PS2 Slim and went out and bought an Action Replay Max so I could download a PS2 save so I could have all the WWE guys, all the TNA guys. Like, that was the first game I ever experienced that with. So Fire Pro is famous for, like, hey, just download 600 fucking guys.
And I don't know if you have any experience with this game, but I do because I was the first person to write about it and talk about it when I was at IGN, which is the game 5 Star Wrestling.
Yeah.
I don't know if you have any insight into those guys. They came to IGN, I want to say during GDC. I wrote extensively about it. They had like this really passionate play. I think they ended up releasing the game on PS3, but I know that they were trying to revive wrestling games during, I guess, a darker time of independent or a dearth of independent games available and when there was really just licensed fare. But I know they were trying to do like some stuff that crossed over into the real world, I think. And I don't know what happened with these guys. I actually don't know the story.
You know, you say coming into this that like you don't follow wrestling and I remember some stuff from before, like Jake the Snake. But you know a lot more than you think you know about wrestling.
Thank you.
Or at least you remember a lot more than you think you remember. But yeah, 5 Star Wrestling came out on the PS3. And you're right, they did cross over. They had their own promotion for a while, and they actually did have a couple names there, like Johnny Nitro, Johnny Impact, Johnny Elite, call him whatever you want. He's had 25 different names. But they had a couple like names come through. The company didn't last. That game is one of the worst fucking games I've ever played in my life. And I don't like to be negative. I would much rather like put something over or do a video talking about like something that was great. I think there's too many people online who just cash in on negativity, so I try to avoid that. But if we're just being honest, Five Star Wrestling was fucking horrible. I've done a couple videos like spotlighting how horrible it is. And but like I didn't make an effort to show how bad it was. I was just playing it. Like I did. Ragnarok is their stand-in Brock Lesnar, and they have Curtis Angel.
Right, I remember that. I remember that. Yes, I remember them showing me that. I think like testing the very limits of legality. I think with that.
The opening, like the first move of that match was I come over, like Brock Lesnar hits me with a headlock takeover, and I just fell through the ring. I just disappeared, and I'm gone for like 10 seconds, and he puts a rear chin lock on nobody. And so in the video, I'm going like, I might have to just throw this out because I can't air this. There's nothing usable here. And then I remerge on the other side of the ring and like fall out of the sky. It's fucking horrible. And the worst part is that is Five Star Wrestling Regenesis, which is the PS4 version.
Oh, I didn't even know they got it out again. Okay, so so that's bad news. Yeah, I didn't know. Yeah. I would pretty much listen to anyone give me a pitch at IGN. I'm actually going back and looking now at the videos we put up and stuff. And yeah, it doesn't look good, but it was a different time, different expectations. Mm-hmm. And I hate previewing games because you have to you have to in some way be fair. Right. Yeah. And that's, I hated doing that shit. All right. I wanted to ask you about backyard wrestling. Is this still a thing at all? Both the little B and little, W backyard wrestling, but also there were backyard wrestling games, as I recall. So what's going on in this realm? This seems like a bygone era of the VHS early internet shit, but I don't know if people are still doing it. And in fact, my old partner, Greg Miller, was a huge backyard wrestling guy as well. He loved that stuff. I think he had a character and everything. So, Gruesome Greggy, I think was the character's name. So, So talk to me about if that still has any relevance.
I mean, as back in the day, I remember in like 2005, it was like the first message board I ever signed up to. There was a backyard wrestling like channel or whatever the hell you call that back then, where people would post threads of like, here's our newest video of our show, where like you would meet people online who were all like 14, 15. They would get together and they would have these super shows in air quotes, like on a mattress with like carpet padding in the backyard. Some of these fuckers would like literally jump off their houses and like through doors, and it was like, you guys are gonna die. But you don't see that so much anymore. Unfortunately, what you do see is a lot of those people just wrestling on the independents, and you can kind of tell like who came straight out of the backyard and into like an actual indie wrestling ring and who was properly trained. And I might sound like a, old man yells at clouds saying that, but you can tell who's good and who isn't. So the days of people uploading videos of them wrestling in their backyard, I think, is come and gone. The days of the video games has definitely come and gone. I think the last one came out in 2005.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
And there's a little piece of trivia. The lead animator on the backyard wrestling video game on PS2 was Cory Barlog.
Oh,
I don't think a lot of people know that.
That's fascinating. Yeah, I love that kind of stuff. Oh, yeah. Innocent provenance indeed. Because, I remember Amy Hennig used to do like pixel art on random SNES games that no one played. And it is interesting how people get their beginnings. What about, so we've come full circle. I want to ask you about this AEW, kind of the rise of AEW and this ability of having a game. Is this the first real competition WWE will have or has in this space in a long time? Because I know that there are other wrestling games, but we've already gone over how they kind of don't meet the mark in terms of the budget and the scale and the licensing and all of this. But AEW to me, I mean, again, in my little bubble, seems to be something that's growing at least in prevalence thanks to the internet, especially. And I'm wondering if this will be sort of an old school style Madden versus 2K football situation, or an old school high heat versus, bases loaded, whatever kind of the situation. What do you think about this?
In terms of AEW as like the real life company, before we get into the video game, this is definitely the stiffest competition that WWE has faced. Somebody could argue that back in the day, TNA, like in 2010,
oh yeah, TNA, right? I forgot about those guys. Yeah.
They were on Spike TV for a while, and there was a while where they were drawing like nearly 2 million viewers per week. And they had guys like Sting there. They had Kurt Angle. They had Jeff Hardy. Hulk Hogan showed up eventually. That was unfortunately where it started to like go down, because they just fucked it all up at that point. But a lot of it was backstage issues. AEW is getting more attention than TNA ever had. And if you compare like the television viewership, you'll see that TNA's ratings were higher, but far fewer people watch TV nowadays.
Right.
More people are streaming it. More people are catching up just through the YouTube channel. AEW's pay-per-view buy rates are way higher than TNA's ever were. So kind of like where it matters, it's shaking out in AEW's favor. But yeah, AEW is definitely growing. They are easily the number 2 in the world. And they have a lot of guys who were mainstays in the WWE, like former WWE champions, have left WWE, like not taken contract extensions because they wanted to come to AEW. Because it's more free form there. You're able to do more of what you want. Nowadays in WWE, and for the longest time, you show up to the building and they hand you a script, and you better memorize what you're going to say tonight. Whereas a lot of these WWE guys coming over to AEW are like doing podcast interviews and saying that like they panic because day one they get there and they'll talk to Tony Khan, who's the guy in charge, and they'll be like, "What do you want me to say?" And he'll be like, "Well, what do you want to say?" And they're like, "Oh shit."
He's the guy that owns the Jaguars, right?
He owns the Jaguars.
Yeah. Interesting. Very interesting. So, that guy. Yeah.
A lot of wrestlers like the freedom in AEW to kind of explore new things, try new stuff. AEW is still, I guess you could say, pretty hardcore. Like there's blood on all of their shows. They still swear a lot. WWE has 10 years ago or so, they shifted over to like they call it the PG era. And a lot of fans don't like it, but they like it in the office because that's how you get your sponsorships with fucking Fruity Pebbles and stuff.
Yeah, no, totally. Totally. Yeah, you got it. The bean counters love that shit. No doubt.
Yeah. Like in the real world, as far as the companies go, AEW is definitely growing. They're the number 2. There's some major issues going on there right now in real life. I don't know if you heard about this, but after the pay-per-view on Sunday, CM Punk, who's their world champion, they always do these like the UFC would do like a post-fight press conference. Punk gets there, and instead of saying like, "Oh, John Moxley and I had a hard-hitting match and I came out on top," he sits down and just goes in on this guy who used to be his best friend until they sued each other in real life. They've had no contact in like 10 years. And Punk is up there. He's like, "This guy doesn't deserve me to say his fucking name." He and his mom share a bank account, which we've figured out through discovery in the lawsuit. And apparently there was a real fight backstage, and everything's been tight-lipped since then. So where AEW stands today, I have no fucking idea.
Interesting. That's good. But that's the stuff. I don't know. You kind of look at that with a little bit of a wink and a nod and a grin and be like, "Oh, don't tune in and find, don't pay more attention."
That's the thing is like, apparently this is real, but there is a part of me that's like, what if it's real, but they're going to have a conversation and make some money with this? Like they're going to, because that's what pro wrestling is. And I have to say, even though I know it's real, I'm going to watch on Wednesday to find out if they talk about it.
Yeah, of course. Well, that's so interesting. I'm also fascinated that I forgot about TNA. I was just looking. They never made a TNA game.
They did. They did make a TNA game.
What was it called?
It was called TNA Impact, which was like their flagship weekly show that was on Spike TV for a while.
It wasn't in the list of because it's called Impact Wrestling. Because I was looking for TNA Impact. Okay, because I was in the list of licensed wrestling games, and I was like, I cannot believe that they didn't do something with this. Okay, so they did.
That's bullshit. You're right. Impact Wrestling, they changed their name in like 2013.
Oh, okay.
When that game came out in 2008, it was still TNA.
Gotcha. Oh yeah, there's 4.
TNA Impact.
I'm seeing now. Okay, here they are. Yeah. So they were originally called this, and they went with all sort different developers. Oh, mobile. Mm-hmm. Okay. Oh, there was a PSP game. I don't remember that. Okay, so yeah, this is I missed all of it. Oh, so there was one PS3 game. You're right. TNA Impact by Midway.
It was Midway Los Angeles.
Wowzers.
It was the team that made Mortal Kombat Shaolin Monks, which is one of my favorite games
They
ever.
also made Thrill Kill, which was the game that never came out. That fighting game that never came out.
Well, didn't it got repackaged into like the Wu-Tang game?
Yeah, it's
eventually?
something with it. What was the thing at IGN? We had a copy of Thrill Kill on PS1 that you could play on a debug kit. It was so because they for people that don't know, Thrill Kill was like this game that got canceled after it went gold because it really drew this controversy. It's really ridiculous when you think about it. Guy had like knives for hands and shit like that, and I'm like, look around, dude. I mean, are you?
Yeah.
Everyone was so uptight about everything back then. They still are today, actually. But okay, so we have all of this on the table now. I'm wondering what the future is. I guess there's kind of a lane for licensed games. Your what is it? What is it now? WWE and
WWE.
Yeah, I can't keep it straight, even though it's been WWE for like 20 years. And then you have your AEWs and whatever, and then you have your other lane for, I guess, unlicensed stuff. Is there like a league or a I don't know what you would even call it. What do you call it? A label? No. What do you call it? A package?
In wrestling, like the promotion?
Promotion.
Like
that's the word I'm looking for. The promotion.
Yeah.
Is there a promotion that's suitably big but smaller than AEW that could court some sort of indie game? Like I think it would be fun to have like an indie style support of a smaller league. Is there anything like that possible, or what's kind of percolating underneath the surface in the smaller space as well?
Sure. I mean, some people would tell you there's a company out there called GCW, which is an independent league, and their focus is kind of like the really hardcore stuff with like light bulbs and fucking barbed wire and pizza cutters and all this shit. That's kind of the backyarders getting in the ring that I was talking about earlier. And some people are going to be really mad that I said that, but it is what it is. I think the internet thinks that company is a lot bigger than it really is. I would imagine that with the Last Stand Media live shows, you guys probably draw comparable or bigger audiences than a lot of the GCW shows do. Now, they will go to certain buildings in New York and draw like a couple thousand people. It's like, okay, that's cool as fuck for you guys, but they don't do that all the time. And you might see a highlight here and there that'll catch your attention, but a lot of that stuff is just not really up to snuff. I would not imagine that they're nearly big enough for anybody to invest money in to make a video game with. Maybe someday, but what we're seeing more now is rather than somebody like, partnering up with a bigger independent promotion, you're seeing stuff like Virtual Basement, which is this developer who's making a game that's coming out that is called The Wrestling Code. That nearly escaped my brain for a second there. But they are basically signing a lot of indie talent to be in the game. And they've got guys from the past like Vampiro, and they were working on getting some people from Impact Wrestling, but I think that eventually fell apart, which is strange. You would think they would want to partner up because they don't have their own game. But yeah, the Wrestling Code from Virtual Basement and stuff like Retromania Wrestling, that's what we're seeing more of, is unbranded with a promotion, but people you recognize in the game. That's what we're seeing.
I'm watching this is fun. I love this kind of stuff. I'm watching a video for the Wrestling Code of a dude doing motion capture in front of like a webcam.
Yeah. Yeah, pretty much.
It's good. I love it. That's good shit. Yeah.
I'm looking forward to seeing what that game is going to be like. And like I've DM'd with a couple people from Virtual Basement here and there, and they invited me to like check the game out. I haven't done it yet, but if I'm just being honest, I hope that the game is going to be fun to play, and I don't have much reason to think that they're not going to be able to put a fun game together. A lot of people on like Discord and Reddit have been very impressed with the graphics of the Wrestling Code, and I think maybe they're getting a little hung up on that. It's like we have not really seen the game yet. Graphics, even if they're shiny, that only goes so far. The TNA game from 2008 still holds up today, looks tremendous, but it's really shallow. So graphics are only going to get you so far. So
totally.
I hope Virtual Basement is able to put a really cool game here together, because that would be awesome. But I talked about AEW as a company, but I didn't talk about the game. AEW Fight Forever is their game.
It's supposed to come out this year, isn't it? But it doesn't have a date.
They say it's going to come out. I don't think it's going to come out.
It's a little late now, I think. I think they have to push it now.
It is late, and what their like lead commentator, his name is Excalibur, on one of their YouTube shows recently, he was talking about it. He's like, AEW Fight Forever coming this fall. And I was like, dude, it's September. What is fall to you?
Yeah.
We don't have a date. We haven't seen we saw one full match of gameplay from whatever event that was that just happened. Gamescom, is that what
Oh
just
yeah,
happened?
Gamescom was the one that just happened. Yeah.
We saw some gameplay there, and that's really all we've seen, other than the snippets that they've allowed us to see. So, in my opinion, there's no fucking way it's coming out this year, unless it's like maybe 3/4 of a game, and then they're going to drop more as time comes. But wrestling fans are hearing that mainstays from their roster, like some of the Dark Order guys and FTR, are not going to be in the game because there was no time. So to me, this does not sound like a game that's ready to come out. And we've waited this long. Apparently, it's been in development since 2019. Just fucking hold on to it until it's ready. You know?
Yeah, I totally agree. There's no reason to rush, especially because they seem to have a little bit of a shine on their real life product. The competition is struggling. People want new and different games. And you can also kind of just play up the us versus the world kind of thing with your game too, that we're the underdog and all of this, but you have to put out a good product. I totally agree. They're probably very, very eager, as I think many developers and publishers were, especially publishers were, to take advantage of this fall because nothing is coming out. So, well, and that's obviously hyperbole. Something is coming out, but it is a very wide open time. If they could get their game ready, I'm sure that they're very eager to do that, but it's cutting it close. If they haven't gone gold yet, then they have to manufacture and pass certification. It's going to seem pretty tight. We're recording this in at the end of the first week of September. So, but I'm looking at the Retromania stuff now because I remember seeing this game, and this seems to be the most appealing one to me. I'm a little surprised. The character in the lower left of the start screen is Zartan from G.I. Joe. I don't know if you know who that is, but it's completely Zartan. I imagine Hasbro didn't notice because that is Zartan to a T.
Okay, so I just Googled. Here's the funny thing: I didn't Google Retromania roster screen. I Googled Zartan G.I. Joe. That's a wrestler named Warhorse who is 100% doing Zartan from G.I. Joe.
Totally, which is awesome. I love that. But this is more my style. I think that the going back and taking advantage of, for lack of a better term, of people's nostalgia and giving them those weekend style games that I love so much that I like to talk about, that just kind of cleaning your palate before the next AAA $60 or $70 game. That's the pocket. I think I want to see more of those kinds of wrestling games. And that's why I appreciated the 5-star wrestling and all that kind of stuff, to at least try to do something different. It obviously didn't work out very well. And I think we'd all like to see Rumble Roses come back for obvious reasons.
Okay. Rumble Roses, 5-star wrestling. And then just to throw one out real quick that I would be surprised if you didn't play back in the day. It seems like it might be right up your alley. Capcom released Saturday Night Slam Masters. And I want to say 1991. It was basically Street Fighter in a wrestling game. And it even had Mike Hagar in it. And they came up with this character Gunlock, who eventually was like shoehorned into Street Fighter canon as Blade.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. Oh yeah, there's Hagar. Yeah, I didn't play this game for sure. This is an early SNES game, huh? 1991 maybe. Yeah, so
it's super fun, and it was gone for a long time. Like there was no way to find it unless you wanted to buy the cartridge for like $35, which by today's standards is pretty affordable with the cost of retro gaming. But it just was re-released in. There's some Capcom collection that just came out, and it's the arcade port of Slam Masters, which is the best version. Highly recommend wrestling fans check it out.
Oh, it's in Capcom Arcade Stadium. That's probably the one.
That's the one. Excellent game, super fun.
It looks really cool. I love
it's
Capcom.
It's more fighting than wrestling. Yeah,
you can see that for sure. It's just got a depth of field. Yeah, that's interesting. All right. Well, Ian, that was fun. It was fun to kind of just catch up on the wrestling scene, as it were, and give our wrestling fans in the audience, of which there are many, your legion, no doubt, a little bit of action, because we talk about all these other things. And I want to have a more inclusive show where we can try to talk about things that even I'm not interested in per se. I'm actually pretty much interested in everything. I like asking questions and learning more. So very happy to do it here. Remind everyone where they can find you. 616 Entertainment, YouTube, I assume podcast services. Do you want to be found on social media?
Just youtube.com/616 Entertainment. I have a Twitch, I have a Patreon, but if you don't like the YouTube, you're not even going to bother checking any of that stuff out. So on YouTube, I've done the history of Halloween, the horror movie franchise, the history of Resident Evil, plenty of wrestling stuff. I have a wrestling game retrospective series called Triangle X Squared Circle, which I think is pretty clever. I didn't come up with it. My buddy Tony did, but the play on words there I thought was nice. And I'm going to do a third season of that soon. So I'm doing the history of God of War right now. And thanks to the old algorithm, it's not doing all that hot, but
You never know.
I stand by it, and I think if any God of War fans check it out, you'll be like, "Oh shit, this is really good."
You really never know with YouTube. It's hard. It's hard to gauge.
Crapshoot, man. Yeah. Crapshoot. YouTube.com/616entertainment. There you go.
All right, my friend. Well, you did a great job. I appreciate you coming and talking to us, and appreciate all of you out there, of course, for listening to Sacred Symbols Plus and all things Last Stand. I will see you next time for more. Go check out 616 Entertainment. Ian, thank you for your time. Again, thank you all out there. We'll see you next time. Until then, goodbye. Sacred Symbols, a PlayStation podcast, is a product and trademark of Last Stand Media and Collins Last Stand LLC, and is proudly recorded in the USA. The show is conceived by, is written by, and is directed by me, Colin Moriarty. My co-hosts are Chris Raygun Maldonado and Dustin Furman. The show is produced by executive producer Dustin Furman. It's edited by associate producer Ben Smith. All of Last Stand's theme music is by my best friend, Ramon Narvaez. As you know, all of Last Stand shows, including Sacred Symbols, are fan-funded on Patreon at patreon.com/laststandmedia. The following names are at the producer level on Patreon, our highest tier, and we're grateful for your thoughtful and kind contributions to our independent endeavor. Thank you.